The classical era took place from 1750 to 1820. It followed the Baroque era, transitioned by a musical style known as Rococo. It is sometimes called the Viennese classical period because many composers spent time working in Vienna. The world was experiencing the Enlightenment, where individuals were empowered by scientific knowledge and truth. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and John Locke led the movement and released essays to the public that championed individualism. Literature and music were written in the vernacular for the enjoyment of lay people. In the same way more people became literate, more people began to play instruments. Young women were expected to play either the piano or the harpsichord, and men were expected to learn the violin, the oboe, or the flute. Public concerts became popular, emphasizing the change from music created for the church to music for entertainment. Classical music was generally homophonic, with an instrument or vocalist taking a solo while the rest of the orchestra provided accompaniment. Alberti bass was often favored. During this time, symphonies were introduced. Stress was placed on melodic expression and instrument color. As a result, phrases were shorter with well-defined cadences. Organized orchestras were uncommon, so to play an orchestral score, those who could play music came together without practice to perform. Despite this, music sounded more complex due to clear musical notation from composers for tempo and dynamics. Dynamics groups include crescendos and decrescendos. Clarinets, flutes, bassoons, and oboes became permanent members of the orchestra, adding depth to the sound. Art was also experiencing changes during this period. The new classical movement arose as a reaction against the Baroque style of ornamentation. It involved rigid styles derived from classical Greek and Roman art and architecture. An example of neoclassical architecture is the Vilnius Cathedral in Lithuania. The cathedral was rebuilt many times because of its repeated destruction during wartime. In 1789, it was built again with strict geometric and symmetrical shape, rising columns, a triangular pediment, and a domed roof, identifying traits of neoclassical architecture. Franz Joseph Haydn was a famous classical composer. He served Prince Nicholas Esterhazy for 30 years as conductor and composer for his orchestra. At the time, musicians were like servants and lived with their employers. Because of this, Haydn spent many years in a secluded palace outside of Vienna. It was a situation where the orchestra could experiment with music, so it was ideal for composing. Haydn wrote a new composition every week. However, he was so isolated that he didn't know he was famous until Prince Esterhazy died and he traveled to London. Haydn wrote his farewell symphony during a long stay at the summer palace. It was a hint to Prince Esterhazy as the musicians wanted to return home. The finale was unusual because, unlike most classical symphonies, it was a second slowly. It was homophonic with steady rhythm. Dynamic changes connected different solos. The movement started with the orchestra playing and a solo played by every instrument one by one. After each solo, the musician blew out a candle on his stand and left, until only the first stand of violins remained. The result of this was a full sound at the beginning, fading into thinner sound at the very end. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is also well known during the classical era. Mozart's middle name means loved by God, because as a child he was very weak, so it was a miracle that he lived. He recovered as he grew up, but his ears remained sensitive, and loud noises would make him physically ill. Both Mozart and his sister, Maria Anna, were musical prodigies. When their father became a freelance musician, Mozart went on tour with him and was exposed to many types of music, even playing concerts of his own. However, once he became a teenager, he was no longer viewed as a child prodigy, so he became a conductor and composer for the orchestra in Salzburg, where he made barely enough to survive. One of the most famous operas Mozart ever composed was The Magic Flute. It's a story of a prince named Tamino and how he completes trials made by the evil Sarastro in order to marry the Queen of Night's daughter, Pamina. In the opera, the Queen of Night sings a song called Der Hal-Rasch, telling Pamina to kill Sarastro or be disowned and cursed. The song is sung by a soprano over the range of 2 octaves, F4 to F6. The soloist has the melody and the orchestra echoes her. The dynamics change according to the emotions of the song but remain relatively loud. Near the end, there's little dissonance in the chords when tension is building. The song ends with a perfect authentic cadence.